Could some of the engines making up CSX's deadlines be reactivated? Well, these pieces of modern history are riding the rails again. Of course, I've shown you what happens to old locomotives when they reach the end of the line. Various models of CSX's motive power are stored here in Waycross, Georgia. But it seems some of the railroad's General Electric Dash 8s and Dash 9s are getting a second chance, at least for now. We'll take a look next. We'll start at what the railroad calls the doghouse. It's probably called that because the Nestle Purina facility here makes dog food, and believe me, you can smell it. It's October 11th, 2025, and right now a CSX Dash 8 and Dash 9 are switching the railroad's Union City yard. Union City is around 20 miles southwest of Atlanta. Switching right now, number 7894. CSX designates this as a CW40-8. C for its two 3-axle trucks, W because it has a wide-nose safety cab, and 40 because it has 4,000 horsepower coming from a turbocharged V16. This unit was built in 1993. The wide-nose cab, introduced on the Dash 8, would become standard on future GE locomotives in North America. It replaced what's known as the standard cab, which didn't have as much front-end protection. Now, GE started building locomotives in its Dash 8 series in the 1980s. There were 4- and 6-axle variations with both standard and wide-nose cabs. Behind 7894, a model that's unique to CSX, and we'll talk about that later. All right, let's see these things out on the main line. It's October 5th, 2025, and train L694 is heading north, getting ready to work Howell's Yard in Atlanta. At least in my area, I started seeing these old CSX Dash 8s and 9s reappearing in late 2025, but there were still a few roaming around before that. Okay, here's a trio of Dash 8s on L694 in Union City on October 12th, 2025. Number 7836 was built in 1992. Something somewhat distinctive about these older GEs is their low-mounted ditch lights. Another interesting piece of trivia that you can see from this trio is that, despite their age, CSX Dash 8s managed to appear in at least 3 different iterations of the CSX paint scheme. And these things also have a tendency to smoke a little when they're throttling up. Not something you'll see very often on more modern diesels. Now these engines still look good passing through iconic locations like this ex-Atlantic coastline bridge. This is next to Maddox Park in Atlanta's Bankhead neighborhood. Alright, this is kind of odd. CSX 7868 ended up with a non-standard font used for its road number. This unit was built in 1993. And, as you've probably noticed, CSX Dash 8s are numbered in the 7000s. So what about engines like number 9010? It was built in 1994. Well, locomotives in this series were produced as 4,400 horsepower -8s, but CSX now designates these as CW40-9s. They were eventually derated to 4,000 horsepower, and a little more than 50 of these were built for CSX. In addition to updated software and internals, these engines got an updated cooling system that would eventually be added to the -9 series of GE locomotives. The -9s are a bit longer than the -8s and ride on updated trucks. Of course, railroads like Norfolk Southern are rebuilding their -9s, equipping them with alternating current instead of direct current traction motors. Those are the motors that turn the wheels. AC motors provide better adhesion and less wheel slip. They're also more reliable, simpler, more rugged, and more efficient than DC motors. CSX is also in the process of rebuilding some of its AC units like the Electromotive Division, ST70 Mac, and the GE AC4400CW. But there are still plenty of nearly original CSX AC4400CWs roaming around. However, these days on CSX, GE's Evolution series dominates. Here's a massive ET44AH built in 2016. GEVOs, as railfans call them, are more efficient than earlier GE locomotives with reduced emissions. And it's really amazing how large these locomotives have gotten. Here's a quick size comparison. The -8 is 70 feet 8 inches, and this modern ET44AH is 74 feet 6 inches. Now, these days, older locomotives with DC traction motors seem to be relegated to yard and shorter distance local service. But that was not the case a little more than 10 years ago. Here's an ex-Conrail -8 leading a mixed freight through Decatur, Georgia in 2014. These ex-Conrail units had red marker lights on the nose above the number boards. And leading this train through Tucker, Georgia in 2011 is one of those unique CSX -9s. Here's a -8 in Decatur in 2010. And standard cab -8s were pretty common back then too. Of course, these things would have been the pride of the fleet back in the early 1990s. In fact, CSX number 1992 got a special Spirit of America paint scheme for George H.W. Bush's second presidential campaign. It was eventually repainted and renumbered to 7812, and I spotted it being stored in Waycross in 2024. Now, if you think about it, -8s aren't really that old. They're only in their mid-30s. Some of the Jeeps on CSX's roster have been around since the 70s. Okay, so what are the oldest units CSX owns? Well, if I had to guess, and correct me if I'm wrong, probably these ex-Pan Am FP9s. They were built in 1954. Of course, these are not used in revenue service. Actually, I'm not even sure if they're used at all. So why are we seeing these older GEs being pressed back into service? Well, I can't say for sure. Perhaps CSX has a motive power shortage, or maybe they're waiting on rebuilds to be released back into the system. They may also be pulling newer units off local service for use on long-distance trains requiring the reactivation of older units. I would think CSX would be able to keep -8s and -9s alive for a long time. They have quite a supply of parts available from stored units. Anyway, that's it for now. I hope you consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't already, and as always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.